They were the ones who never came home.
As soon as we got down there, the shots came through our door.
A gunman taking innocent lives.
I kept checking Hona's pulse. I was holding her hand the entire time.
A community torn apart. Now the state is making changes.
We want every child that arrives on one of our campuses to go home safely.
Gun legislation stamped and approved. Lawmakers now divided.
There's one common thread between all of these horrific tragedies. It's the gun.
Banning the weapon itself will not prevent that person from doing a violent act.
Are guns the problem, or are they getting into the wrong hands?
We need criminal control, not gun control.
This is News 6 at 5. Guns, rights, and safety. Well, tonight, a UCF student is reliving the moments a gunman fired several shots. Her friends nearby killed. This is News 6 at 5. I'm Matt Austin.
And I'm Lisa Bell. And tonight we are committed to looking at gun-related issues from legislation to school guardians now in place. It comes 1 year after the deadly school shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. 17 people lost their lives, many of them students. News 6 anchor Ginger Gadsden begins our coverage at 5. She is live in Parkland tonight. And Ginger, the student you spoke with now lives here in Central Florida. But what did she have to say about that day, and how has it changed her?
Yeah, Lisa and Matt, Valentine's Day 2018 has profoundly changed the way Caitlin Jesenowski sees just about everything. She still has nightmares about the day Nikolas Cruz shot into her classroom, killing 2 of her classmates. But she says she refuses to let that day define her future.
Caitlin Jesenowski is an impressive college freshman. She's smart, ambitious, and athletic. And like most 19-year-old college students, just trying to navigate her way through freshman year at UCF. But she has experienced something many of us pray we never will.
Here's what we know right now. This happened at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School.
Caitlin was inside one of the classrooms when Nikolas Cruz opened fire last Valentine's Day.
When I got to 4th period, the last thing I remember, they were handing out carnations actually for Valentine's Day. And then the shots came, the first set, and we all kind of looked at each other like what, like in a panic, and then everyone dove and separated into different corners. So I ran to the corner diagonal from the door, which there's a computer cart there, and I moved the computer cart, and 3 of us ended up getting behind the computer cart, and as soon as we got down there, the shots came through our door.
Quick thinking to get behind a computer cart likely saved her life, but it was too late for 2 of her classmates.
Like the next thing you know, I look up and Helena and Nick are right in front of me. And the first thing I do is grab Helena's hand, and I try to check her pulse, and I couldn't find anything.
Within minutes, 17-year-old Helena Ramsey and 17-year-old Nick DeWarrett were dead. Caitlin held Helena's hand, trying to reassure her.
She was leaning against the wall, unconscious. So I grabbed her hand, and I was telling her it was going to be okay, and I was stroking her hair and everything. So.
Yeah. But did you kind of know?
Yeah, I think I did, but I just wanted to, I had to keep checking just in case. But when the SWAT came in and checked her, he shook his head no, my stomach dropped.
That day forever changed how Caitlin sees the world and how she reacts when she's out in it.
Everywhere I go, I have to see, like, if something happened, an exit or what I would do. Like, I have to have a plan in mind. And it's kind of just like an automatic thing. I just like look around and be like, okay, check, check.
And if the shooter thought his act of cowardice would give him power over people like Caitlin, not quite.
You feel stronger after something like that?
Yeah, I do.
And what way?
Emotionally, I feel like I see life in a more positive aspect. I try to spread love and like see everything more positively. I'm also not afraid as many things as I was before. I think if I can get through that, then I can get through most things.
And back out here live at Parkland, she is definitely a tough young lady. She knew all along she wanted to have a career where she could help others, and that day helped her decide that she would go into nursing. And I think that is a fitting field for a young lady who really was heroic on that day. Back to you.
Incredible story, Ginger. Thank you. And we will see you again in about 30 minutes. To read more about each of the victims of the Parkland school shooting, head to clickorlando.com/gunviolence. We have images of each of the victims and comments from their families. Well, Florida lawmakers will soon return to Tallahassee with plans to discuss new gun legislation.
News 6 investigator Mike DeForest traveled to the state capitol to find out what our elected leaders are proposing.
Following last year's deadly shooting in Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, lawmakers here in Tallahassee passed a series of gun control measures. Now, this year here at the state capitol, some want to repeal those brand new gun laws, while others want to impose even more restrictions.
Every student in Florida has a right to learn in a safe environment.
With the stroke of his pen, former Governor Rick Scott raised the minimum age to purchase firearms, banned bump stocks, and gave judges and law enforcement the power to take guns away from Floridians who pose a risk to themselves or the community.
As an officer in the Air Force, I said an oath to protect and defend our Constitution.
Now, newly elected State Representative Mike Hill is trying to repeal those gun laws, saying they violate Floridians' Second Amendment rights.
The weapon itself does not cause the danger or cause the harm. It's the person who's holding that weapon.
The Republican from Pensacola has also filed a bill that would allow guns to be carried on college campuses.
Why should that person not be able to protect themselves?
We certainly don't need to be going backwards. We need to be going forward.
State Senator Linda Stewart and Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith have reintroduced bills that would ban assault rifles like the one used in the Pulse nightclub attack.
These are weapons of war. They were made for war.
These two Democrats realize the Republican-controlled legislature is unlikely to agree. That's why Smith is urging Floridians to bypass his fellow lawmakers by amending the state's constitution.
There is already an effort underway to collect enough signatures to put the question before voters in 2020 to ban assault weapons in the state of Florida.
The legislative session begins next month here in Tallahassee. Now, some of those proposed gun laws may not even make it to the floors of the House and Senate for a vote, but others could pass, leaving their fate up to the newly elected governor, Ron DeSantis.
Well, Florida reacted after the deadly school shooting in Parkland. Weeks following the shooting, Florida became the first state to require police or armed guardians in all schools. Now, early this morning, a dozen new applicants began their training. Leaders say these people will replace deputies in schools. News 6's Lauren Korn spoke to Volusia County leaders about the success so far.
We are 6 months into the school year with armed guardians protecting our staff and students. So we sat down with the school district to find out how it's going so far and if there's anything they'd like to change for the future.
They are an intricate part of our security program.
Good afternoon. Welcome back.
But they're also there to build relationships and a peace of mind for our parents and our communities because they're there for a purpose.
47 armed guardians are manning the elementary and charter schools, patrolling the hallways and securing the campuses. Like lead guardian Chico Mendiza of Indian River Elementary School in Edgewater.
We monitor what happens all around us.
Mendiza says he's seen a difference in the amount of threats and inappropriate behavior.
Ultimately, in the long run, it has gone down. You can see where students would utilize the Fortify system. They would utilize see something, say something. They would talk to counselors, talk to the guardian, and nip a lot of this in the bud immediately.
In fact, the armed guardians are so successful, the district says the sheriff asked for a pilot program, replacing officers with school guardians in 3 middle schools and an alternative learning site to help with deputy shortages.
Just like we would at an elementary school, to do the same duties we're currently doing right now at those schools to maintain the security of those campuses.
Greg Aiken, Chief Operating Officer, says along with the armed guardians, the Florida Department of Education recently recommended the district to implement a hardened corner for every teacher in every school.
There are windows on our doors, so if an assailant actually shot through that glass window and they tried to look in, is there an area in your classroom or in your office area that would not be visible from that door window area? And that would be what we consider your hardened corner.
For Indian River Elementary, students look for the red manatee during a Code Red 2 lockdown.
They'd come into this area here and then secure themselves.
It's another added form of security to keep children safe as the trained guardians move to the forefront.
I think for us to be in place to mitigate that incident from moving further until law enforcement can get here, or with medical in real time talking with dispatch as to what's happening is a huge, huge difference.
The district says security plans and programs are always changing, and staff reviews and implements the best practices possible. But Aiken says they could always use more meetings, communication, and education.
Our number one focus, besides education, is safety. We want every child that arrives on one of our campuses to go home safely that afternoon.
Well, minutes ago, we told you about how recent changes in gun laws can affect you and your family.
But there are other ways people are getting guns without background checks and avoiding other restrictions. News 6 investigator Adriana Ivashinsky joins us in studio with how guns can still end up in the hands of children, criminals, and even the mentally ill.
Absolutely, yes, even though there are background checks and mandatory waiting periods when you buy a gun in a store or at a show, there's no gun registry, so there is nothing that can prevent the private sale of a gun between two people or giving the gun as a gift. Now, I talked with both gun owners and crime victims about this unrestricted access to guns.
Let me take care of this gentleman here.
I own about 3 handguns, a rifle, a couple of shotguns.
Alexander Gonzalez is a military veteran who served 13 years as a combat medic. And while he's undergone a background check for every one of his weapons, he plans on one day passing them down to his children.
I have a son, and one day I want to hand down my firearms to my son.
Inheriting a gun is just one of the many ways a person can get their hands on a gun legally. You can also buy or get one from a friend, a neighbor, or online at places like Facebook or Craigslist. And because you don't need a permit or a license to buy a gun in Florida, there's no way to track what guns you own.
Guns just get handed down, and there's not really a paper trail on them.
But what if that person is deemed dangerous or mentally ill? Orlando attorney Kendra Paris says there is a state database, but it only restricts people who have been identified as mentally incompetent from purchasing or possessing firearms.
So for most people who admit themselves voluntarily, no, they're not going to encounter a firearm restriction because they're not dangerous to themselves or others. They're just trying to get some help.
The other way people can get guns? By stealing them or buying them on the black market.
Criminals don't obey gun laws.
Rafael Zaldivar knows that all too well.
Alex should be missed.
His son Alexander was shot and killed by a felon who had access to a gun.
He shot my son twice. He went in there with a firearm. Where did he get that firearm?
But despite that, Zaldivar feels families should have the right to bear arms and protect themselves, even if they're underage.
What about that single mother that can't protect herself until she's 21? And somebody kicks in the door. What is she going to do? I don't think that's fair to her.
Now, as for the criminal side of owning guns, I reached out to all 4 state attorneys' offices and discovered hundreds of cases of felons charged with owning a gun illegally just last year alone. For a look at the numbers, head to clickorlando.com.
At least 369,000, that's how many people in Central Florida have concealed weapons permits. But the problem is having a permit doesn't necessarily mean you know how to use a gun safely.
News 6 traffic safety expert Steve Montiero talks about safety on a daily basis. When it comes to guns, proper safety isn't an option, it's a necessity. He takes us to a local concealed weapons permit class to show us why all classes are not created equal.
Pick the gun up, finger off the trigger, loaded. Put your finger on the trigger, start squeezing. Finger off the trigger, wow.
She's tearing out the center. But the best part is she's doing it safely. More Central Floridians are arming up every year for personal safety.
People from all walks of life, all different experience with guns.
John Lassiter has been a firearms instructor with Addison's Gun Shop in Kissimmee for 30 years.
3,000 to 5,000 people.
And every single one of his concealed weapons classes starts with
safety.
But John says not all classes are up to par.
What I try to do first thing, I simply go over from ground zero. So the basic stuff out there, people need it. We take it for granted, because we're around guns, that they should know this. They don't.
First, some education before ever touching a gun.
Number 1 rule of gun safety, always point muzzle in a safe direction. Always, always, always keep your finger off the trigger unless you're shooting the weapon.
After the basics, it's time to learn how to safely handle an unloaded gun.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to open the cylinder. That's a professional way for me to hand you this gun.
It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
It's
not what you expected.
No, it's a lot heavier than I thought it would be.
Then it's time to head to the range.
I want to see everything perfect. Then I'm going to tell you to shoot. Then you put your finger on the trigger, nice slow trigger pull. Bam, finger off the trigger, set the gun down. Same way every time. Muscle memory is what we're building right here. The most important thing is range time, and I'm talking about real range time with real instructors that are going step by step what they want, not just throwing you a box of shells and a gun and say, okay, can you get a couple rounds down range?
Because you can always tell the difference when someone has real experience.
Nice. No, not bad at all.
But the education should not stop there.
And get back to a range quickly. The same person will buy a gun for self-protection. Go put it in their nightstand. That thing will sit there for 10 years. They'll never look at it. They'll never go shoot it or whatever. That's my biggest thing. If you're going to do this, do it right.
Once you've gotten your certificate from the safety class and your permit from the state of Florida, you are now allowed to carry within your rights here. Keep in mind, as a law enforcement officer, we are the only ones that are allowed to openly carry. Concealed carry permit means just that.